Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch our video. We hope you learn a lot and can apply some of these lessons to your daily lives. Today, we're going to be walking through a lot of the basics of sleep, including the sleep cycle, what the circadian rhythm is, what's the concept of sleep debt, some common sleep disorders that people face, misconceptions about sleep that can affect your sleep quality, and then how sleep and sports can relate. And of course, drowsiness is red alert.
So, starting with the sleep cycle and the four stages of sleep. So, when you first fall asleep, you enter the N1 stage. This is your lightest sleep. Here, your body starts to relax, your brain activity slows. If you're hooked up to an EEG machine, you'll notice these patterns of brain activity called theta waves. Then, after a couple minutes in N1 sleep, you'll enter N2. Here, your body temperature drops, your breathing and heart rate slow, as well as your brain activity. If again, you'll see these patterns of brain activity called sleep spindles and K complexes. And over the course of a typical night, you'll spend roughly half of your time in N2 sleep. Moving forward, you enter N3 sleep. This is your deepest stage of sleep. Here, your breathing is at its slowest and your body is going into repair mode. You'll also see these patterns of brain activity called delta waves. Then the final stage of sleep is REM. It stands for rapid eye movements. Here, your brain is very active. Your body goes into paralysis, except for the muscles involved in breathing. And it's in this stage that dreaming occurs. And so, over the course of a typical night, you'll go through 4 to 6 different cycles of sleep before finally waking up. And as the night goes on, your deep sleep N3 stage gets shorter and your REM stage gets longer.
The circadian rhythm is essentially the process of your body regulating how awake to be and how asleep to be. And this is essentially to maintain homeostasis within the body. So the body uses a few hormones to create the sensation of sleepiness, which is melatonin, and then cortisol to keep you awake. And the circadian rhythm is why if you're traveling, you might experience jet lag. And that's simply when your circadian rhythm and your body's pattern with the sun is different because you're in a new spot in the world. And interestingly, awareness peaks twice a day. The first is going to be right after you wake up, and this is just because your body is fresh from sleeping. And second is around an hour before you go to bed, and this is because your body is producing a lot of wake hormones to fight the sleepiness that builds up during the day. And as a result, peak performance is usually between 4 and 8 p.m. when your body reaches its maximum body temperature. Another super important concept is called sleep debt. It's a well-known fact now that adults need a minimum of 7 to 8 hours a day of sleep. But if you're not hitting that amount of sleep, you're going to accumulate something called sleep debt. Limited sleep debt is okay and can be paid down if you sleep a little bit more. However, uh, if you have a large amount of sleep debt and you do not pay that down in a reasonable amount of time, permanent brain damage can occur. So it's very important to recognize how much sleep debt you have if you're not meeting your 7 to 8 hours minimum and pay that down as quickly as possible. Next, we'd like to talk about some common sleep disorders. The first of which is insomnia, which is probably the most famous. It's essentially just the inability to fall or stay asleep at night. The second is sleep apnea or OSA. This one affects around 25 million Americans, so very prevalent. And this is essentially when pausing and breathing occurs at night due to some irregularities in the throat. This can also be, related to snoring. And the third is narcolepsy, which is expressed by five main symptoms. The first is cataplexy, which is when you just lose muscle tone. The second is hallucinations. The third is excessive daytime sleepiness. And then fourth and fifth are sleep paralysis and sleep attacks. Most famously, narcolepsy is when you fall asleep at regular times during the day. And then last is restless leg syndrome, which is a genetic disorder that affects 5 to 15% of people in the United States, and is just the uncontrollable urge to move legs at night.
Now let's demystify some common sleep misconceptions. The first common misconception is thinking I can sleep in extra on weekends. This isn't quite true, because sleeping extra on weekends and not sleeping a consistent amount every day will disturb your circadian rhythm, which can be relatively unhealthy. The next sleep misconception is I only need a few hours of sleep. If you only get a few hours of sleep, you might look like the person on the right. And this is obviously very harmful, very unhealthy. And as we talked about before, you'll accumulate a lot of sleep debt, which can lead to things we will talk about later. Third sleep misconception is snoring is normal. Snoring is actually very preventable. Things like sleep apnea or improper mouth position while sleeping can lead to snoring. However, all these things can be treated, whether it's through a sleep apnea machine or simply something like closing your mouth. If you're snoring, you might want to consult a doctor because um, you'll get better sleep when you're not snoring. Um, our fourth sleep misconception is I need less sleep as I age. While you may be able to get less deep sleep or a lower quality of sleep as you age, you still need those 7 to 8 hours, as we mentioned before. And again, if you don't, you might look like the guy on the right, which doesn't look great.
Now we're going to talk about sleeps and sports. So first, I'm going to talk about how sports affect sleep. Um, so athletes usually have long travel times, which can affect sleeps when they play in different places. Um, Also, when athletes, people who play sports go to sleep right after playing sports, this might affect their recovery time and how deep the sleep and the quality of the sleep is. It's usually not as good because their body had just gone through like intense physical activity. And also game locations, depending on where they play, this might affect the circadian rhythm. And now how sleep affects sports, the accuracy or the level of performance that the athletes are performing at. Because of if they don't get enough sleep, their accuracy, for example, in free throws can be reduced. Also, because the with intense physical activities, and with low recovery time, um, due to the lack of sleep, athletes might be susceptible to a higher injury and likelihood than if they slept well. And also the reaction speeds while they're performing also decreases. Now we're going to talk about drowsiness. So drowsiness is just when you're feeling tired, usually because of lack of sleep during the day. And the following symptoms are common of drowsiness. First is yawning, when you just yawn a lot throughout the day. Second is the reduced behavioral activity. You can also suffer from lapses of attention and having trouble focusing and concentrating for long periods of times. Your eyes constantly closing, and also your head nodding, which just shows how like sleepy you are. And then the risks of the lack of sleep include like hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and obesity. And remember,
Drowsiness
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 is
is
red
red
alert.
alert.
red alert.
Thank you for watching.